So we ought to finish this next week. Seems like it's went pretty quick, but anyway. So Job 38, God speaks. He's not spoken at all since the second chapter, and he has not yet spoken to Job throughout this entirety of this calamity that Job's faced. And throughout the book, Job continually asks God for a hearing or a trial, so to speak. Job continually asks God to answer him, and continually wonders why this has all happened, and God has not spoken at all. But as he speaks here in chapter 38 and all the way through 41, throughout all that, God never tells Job why Job went through what he did. Now, we know because of what we've read in chapter 1 and 2, but Job has no idea. The battle or the contest, I suppose, between God and Satan that is spelled out in chapter 1 and 2. And throughout this time that God speaks through these next 4 chapters, God never really even addresses Job's calamity. And I think that might be for us to help us understand that we're not going to understand everything that we go through or why we go through certain things. And I think the book of Job is a direct lesson for us to help us understand we're not going to understand God's ways, and God's not always going to tell us why he does what he does or allows what he allows. And God answers Job, so to speak, throughout a bunch of questions. Now, I think I read this week that there were 70 questions outlined between chapter 38 and 41. God asking Job these questions that cannot be answered, and it's just point out to Job that God is far superior than anything Job can imagine, and Job is left to be speechless. Basically throughout these next 4 chapters. He does speak, but he doesn't have anything to say, you know what I mean? But anyway, so that being said, I want to bring us back, though, to Job chapter 36, where Elihu is talking to Job, and he alludes to the fact that there's a storm coming. And it begins, we're not going to read it, but I want to point it out that beginning in chapter 36, around verse 22 or so, Elihu is talking to Job, and he apparently is talking about an oncoming thunderstorm that's coming. And you can, if you read through chapter 36 and 37, you can see the imagery that Elihu is using here. And then when we get to chapter 38, verse 1, it says that the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. So commentators are alluding to the fact that God is speaking to Job, and he's came to Job out of this thunderstorm that Elihu has been describing. So that's where the whirlwind perhaps comes from here in Job 38, verse 1. So God is going to begin asking questions, and as he begins to ask, as the questioning gets further along, the questions become probably more possible to answer, but there's just some things that can't be answered. And you'll see, I think we'll see the lessening of the seriousness of the questions as we go through here. That may not be the right way to say that, but you'll understand, I think, as we go through here. So Job 38, verse 1. Now, again, understand, God has been silent throughout this book after chapter 2. And actually, in chapter 2, he's speaking to Satan. He never speaks to Job, but now he's going to be speaking to Job. And here we go. Understand, these questions that God asked Job are unanswerable. All right?
Job 38.
There we go.
Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and answer thou me. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare, if thou hast understanding.
So right off the bat, I think in verse 2, God is referring to Job's 4 friends here. They darkeneth counsel without knowledge. They have no idea. And that's been proven. As we've been reading the accounts of the 4 friends, they have no idea why Job is suffering the way he has been. And their words have proved they have no knowledge as to why. And so God, in a sense here in verse 2, is mocking them and saying they're talking without any kind of knowledge. Now we'll notice what he says in verse 3. In other words, what we would say, buckle up. I'm about to answer you. And the first question, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Now, there is no answer to that. God is right off the bat showing his power, his authority, his transcendence, his omnipotence, his omniscience. All power is shown right here. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth, Job? And I can imagine Job saying, but this is how it's going to go here. Verse 5.
Who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest? Or who hath stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who shut up the sea with doors when it brake forth, as if it had issued out of the womb? When I made the cloud the garment thereof, and thick darkness a swaddling band for it, and brake up for it my decreed place, and set bars and doors, and said, Hitherto shalt thou come, but no further. And here shall thy proud waves be stayed.
So God has set the bounds for even the oceans. As powerful and as large as the oceans are, there comes a point on the shore where now granted, there's storms and stuff that can make the waves larger, but on a sunny day, typically the waves only go so far. And no matter how powerful the ocean is, you can walk up to where it stops and not get your feet wet. And everybody understands what I'm talking about if you've been to the beach. There is a spot where it doesn't go any further. Again, on a typical day. We can all make exceptions about storms and whatnot. And there's high tide and low tide. But even on a high tide, it only goes so far. Have you ever been on vacation, you set your stuff up on the beach, and then maybe 3 or 4 hours later, you got to pack up and move back, or vice versa. You've set up, and then by noon, you're 20 feet away from where the water stopped. I don't know. I can't explain that. And why would God have even thought of causing the tides, high tide and low? I mean, where would that have even? We have no answer for that. We can't explain that. Now, we might be able to explain now by modern science why things are the way they are, but we don't understand the reasoning behind it, perhaps. So, God's asking all these questions that Job has no answer for. Why have I set the bounds of the ocean right here? I don't know. But like Terry said, because that's where it is. And God perhaps has a reason, but he's not told us why. Verse 13, I believe.
Hast thou commanded the morning since thy
12.
days, and caused the day spring to know his place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, that the wicked might be shaken out of it? It is turned as clay to the seal, and they stand as a garment. And from the wicked their light is withholden, and the high arm shall be broken. Hast thou entered into the springs of the sea? Or hast thou walked in the search of the depth?
The springs of the sea. Apparently there are springs in the oceans. But Job doesn't know that at that point. I think now with our modern science we do. But perhaps we don't understand why they're there.
Have the gates of death been opened unto thee? Or hast thou seen the doors of the shadow of death? Hast thou perceived the breadth of the earth? Declare if thou knowest it all.
So God gives him an opportunity here in verse 18. If you got answers for these questions, Job, now's your time. And I can just imagine Job like, I don't have any idea. But God gives him an opportunity to answer. And Job has no answer for it. Again, this is God showing Job that he is more powerful and more transcendent than Job can ever imagine. And Job was demanding, in some ways, in prior chapters, that God answer him as to why he's going through the problems he's going through. And now God's speaking and telling Job, essentially, I'm not going to tell you why. It's just when we think about God, we think about how powerful He is, and we really begin to understand or think about why does a tree grow, or why was it 2 months ago a man on a tractor went out there and planted a bunch of seed, and now when you drive to church, all this corn's popping up. How does all that work? Now we can think, well, this, that, and the other, but really, do we really understand why God allowed it to work the way it does? And the amount of seed that's planted and the amount of seed that creates, that was all God. Now, hopefully we as Christians can look at creation or look at those types of things and see that that's God doing that. But we really don't understand why God has chosen to make that work the way it does. Or why some days you put out a garden or whatever and then it never grows or it never produces. It's the way God wanted it, I guess. But God asked him, if you know, then declare what you know, here in verse 18. Verse 19.
Where is the way where light dwelleth? And as for darkness, where is the place thereof?
Yeah, where does the darkness go when the light comes on? You ever thought about that?
That thou shouldst take it to the bound thereof, and that thou shouldst know the paths to the house thereof. Knowest thou it because thou wast then born, or because the number of thy days is great? Hast thou entered into the treasures of the snow? Or hast thou seen the treasures of the hail which I have reserved against the time of trouble, against the day of battle and war?
Now, many times, especially in Scripture, the sign of hail would be God's judgment or God's avenging of his enemies. But he says there he's got a store. He's got a treasure house full of hail that's reserved. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't know why I think the same thing. It was always 75 degrees. I don't know, but yeah, they had snow and cold and all that. It is something that you really don't give much thought of about their weather. Yeah. But where have you been? Have you entered and seen the treasure of snow I have? Have you seen the storehouse of hail I've got? No. You don't know what's coming. But again, God is asking these questions. He's demanding an answer from Job. And it's kind of like, well, I'm not going to go there. Anyway, verse 25, I believe.
By what way is the
24.
light parted, which scattereth the east wind upon the earth? Who hath divided a water course for the overflowing of waters, or a way for the lightning of thunder, to cause it to rain on the earth, where no man is, on the wilderness, wherein there is no man?
Have you thought of, I didn't think about that till this week, but it rains in places on the earth where there's not even anybody living. In all these desolate places where no one lives, it still rains there. Why? Why are there trees in areas where there's never been a man? Now, we might have a hard time believing that there are areas of the world where there's not been anybody there. But think about that. Here's why, verse 27.
To satisfy the desolate and waste ground, and to cause the bud of the tender herb to spring forth. Hath the rain a father? Or who hath begotten the drops of dew? Out of whose womb came the ice, and the hoary frost of heaven, who hath gendered it? The waters are hid as with a stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. Canst thou bind the sweet influences of Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion? Canst thou bring forth Mazzaroth in his season, or canst thou guide Arcturus with his sons?
Is there any way that a man could move the stars from where they are? That's what he's talking about here. Where is it there? Pleiades and Orion, Mazzaroth and Arcturus, or however you pronounce it. Those are all types of constellations. Why are they there? The North Star, apparently, they say never moves. I don't know. The Big Dipper is always in the north sky. Is there anything that a man can do to move those things? No. God has placed them there, and there's nothing you can do about it. So, if God is in control of all that, all of the stars, I believe that he is capable to be in control of us and to deal with us the way he feels he needs to, in a way. But there's nothing we can do about changing the places of the stars. There's nothing we can do to prevent the daylight from coming or the nighttime from coming. That's all in God's plan. There's nothing we can do to make it rain or to make it not rain. Whoa. You all right?
Yeah, I pushed the wrong button.
Hopefully these verses are showing us how powerful God is. Now perhaps we have not really thought about all this because it's just the way that it is. But when God's asking the questions, we need to stop and think, there's nothing I can do about any of that. I have no power whatsoever to change the course of the oceans or the rivers. I have no power to change the constellations. I have no power to change the weather or the coming of the day or the coming of the night. I have no power over the air that I breathe. I have no power over to make a tomato plant grow when it comes down to it. Now, we can take pride in our garden and say, look at what I've done, but really? The only reason you got a tomato plant going is because God will let it grow. And that's why I didn't have any last year. Because God didn't want me to have any, I guess.
So don't they say that Job was Job before the flood?
I don't know if Job was before or after.
Because he's talking about rain.
Okay, well, yeah, then that would be after the flood. Yeah. Good catch. Good catch.
Huh?
Verse
I didn't know if he had any extra.
33.
Knowest thou the ordinances of heaven? Canst thou set the dominion thereof in the earth? Canst thou lift up thy voice to the clouds, that abundance of waters may cover thee? Canst thou send lightnings, that they may go, and say unto thee, Here we are? Who hath put wisdom in the inward parts, or who hath given understanding to the heart? Who can number the clouds in wisdom, or who can stay the bottles of heaven, when the dust groweth into hardness, and the clods cleave fast together? Wilt thou hunt the prey for the lion, or fill the appetite of the young lions when they couch in their dens and abide in the covert to lie in wait? Who provideth for the raven his food, when his young ones cry unto God? They wander for lack of meat.
You know, it's impossible for you to feed all the birds. And if you have a bird feeder, well, let me back up here. So, in years past, we have had bird feeders. We have made the decision that we don't need to feed them anymore, partly because they feel welcome at our house. Well, they used to. And they would make nests where we didn't want birds to be nesting. And after hundreds of dollars being spent, we have won the battle, but part of that is also we're not feeding the birds anymore. But you know what? I don't see any dead birds laying around because my sunflower seeds ain't out there. So I suppose in a way we were just making the birds fatter. Well, but, yeah.
Squirrels aren't real happy with us, though.
No, the squirrels aren't happy with us, but we are not feeding the animals anymore. We are allowing God to handle all that now.
Let go and let God.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, because they would end up building a nest, and it's like, how are they getting up there? And then, when they build a nest, what happens underneath it? So, but we have won the battle.
For now.
For now.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. But again, I don't know how much money we've spent. Probably not hundreds, but,
Enough.
I'm talking about to prevent the birds from coming.
Yeah.
Anyway, but understand that God is the one that feeds the animals. Yes, Ron. For the squirrel? Oh. Let me see here. I got to. Yeah.
I hope they are.
Yeah. Let me see here. I got couple things I want to read. I want to see if it's going to matter now. Anyway, let's go. I'm going to find this here. I'm going to read some verses I've got here. I'm not going to necessarily turn there, but to kind of sum up chapter 38, Psalm 19:1, the heavens declare the glory of God. Romans 1:19 and 20, the things that are made are clearly seen and understood by thine eternal power and Godhead. Verily, let's see here. I cannot by searching find out God. I cannot find out the Almighty unto perfection. That's Job 11. Great is the Lord, greatly to be praised. His greatness is unsearchable. Psalm 145:3. Who can utter the mighty acts of the Lord? Who can show forth his praise? Psalm 106:2. Who is a God like unto thee, glorious in holiness, fearful in praises, doing wonders? Exodus 15:11. Who in the heaven can be compared unto the Lord? Who among the sons of the mighty can be likened unto the Lord? Psalm 89:6. O Lord God of hosts, who is a strong Lord like unto thee, or to thy faithfulness round about thee? Psalm 89:8. Among the gods there is none like unto thee, O Lord, neither are there any works like unto thy works. Psalm 86:8. For thou art great and doest wondrous things. Thou art God alone. Psalm 86:10. Thou art God, not, let's see here, that's not it. As heaven is high up above the earth, so are thy thoughts above my thoughts, and thy ways above my ways. Isaiah 55:9. All nations before thee are as a drop of the bucket, or the small dust of the balance, that thou takest up the isles as very little thing. Isaiah 40:15. They are as nothing and are counted to thee as less than nothing and vanity. Isaiah 40:17. God is much greater than we are. We can't comprehend, and we may point our finger at him and demand an answer, but God may not answer you, just like he's not answering Job. All he's doing to Job is asking a bunch of questions to show how little Job really is. So when things come our way, that's not to say we can't pray and we can't ask God and we can't ask God to help us in our calamity or to change the situation. But ultimately, we're to just rest in the Lord and let him take care of it and work it out. God, work it out, however, for your glory. Amen. And eventually, I think our prayers do get changed to that. They may not in the middle of the situation be that, but I think eventually, over time, that becomes our prayer. Whatever comes, Lord, make it for your glory. Amen. And again, hard to do, but I think over time, we get to be that way. So understanding that God is what he is, and he's going to do what he does. And there's really not going to be anything that we can do to change it. So we just rest in him and hope, knowing full well that we are in his hand to bless us the way he sees fit. So comments on chapter 38. All right. So God has used the weather and nature and those types of things in chapter 38 or 38. In chapter 39, he's going to begin to lessen the gravity of the questions, and he's going to be asking about the animal kingdom and how the animals work. Now, in some ways, perhaps, Job would know the answers to some of these questions just by observation. But I got to thinking about this, and you'll see perhaps what I'm thinking as we go through these, but we all understand that a baby human takes 9 months. Does anybody understand why it takes 9 months? No. Only that's what God said it to be. Now, rabbits are what, 28 days or something like that? Anybody know? No? Yeah, elephants are over a year. But we may see that by observation and understand, oh, well, you're pregnant? Well, you'll have a baby in 9 months. But do we really understand why God made it to be 9 months instead of 9 days? Do we understand why some animals, when they give birth, their young can stand up and walk immediately? And why it takes a child 2 years? Or however long, 18 months, however long does it take?
Just depends.
Can you imagine having a baby and then it just take off walking? Well, that'd be something, wouldn't it? But that's the way God made it. That's the way God made it. And we don't understand all that. And so some of these questions in chapter 39, we may know the answers by observation, but we don't understand the answers, if that makes sense. So anyway, 39 verse 1 here.
Job 39. Knowest thou the time when the wild goats of the rock bring forth? Or canst thou mark when the hinds do calve? Canst thou number the months that they fulfill? Or knowest thou the time when they bring forth?
So again, reiterating what I've just said here, we can perhaps we can know these answers by observation, but we don't really understand why. And again, God is going to lessen the gravity of these questions here as he goes through.
They bow themselves. They bring forth their young ones. They cast out their sorrows. Their young ones are in good liking. They grow up with corn. They go forth, and return not unto them.
You know, I could be wrong, but most animals I don't think live as a family. You know, I mean, maybe as they're raising their young, like the deer. We was driving the golf cart around town yesterday and saw two sets, a mom with two young ones in both times. But, I mean, they don't all just live all their lives together like humans do, so to speak. I don't know how long a fawn is with their mother and then they just go. I don't know. You ever think they go and visit them? Oh, that's my grandma over there. You know, I mean, they don't think that way. That's not the way animals work.
I think that way whenever I'm hunting them.
Yeah. Well, but notice what he says there. Verse 4. They go forth and they return not to them. They don't visit. Now they hang while they're growing up, but once, and I don't know how long it takes. I'm using a deer as an example, or a dog. How long does it take for a dog to be weaned? 8 weeks? You know, I don't know. But then after they're grown, it's not like, oh, well, this is my mom. Anyway, that's what he's talking about there in verse 4. Verse 5.
Who hath sent out the wild ass free? Or who hath loosed the bands of the wild ass? Whose house I have made in the wilderness, and the barren land his dwellings. He scorneth the multitude of the city, neither regardeth he the crying of the driver. The range of the mountains is his pasture, and he searcheth after every green thing.
So a wild ass just lives out in desolation. He doesn't listen to somebody. That's what he's saying about regardeth the crying of the driver. You can't tame him. The range of the mountains is his pasture. They live wherever they want to live, but they don't go to the city where the people are because they're wild. Why? Well, that's the way it is. That's the answer, because that's the way it is. Now, verse 9, the unicorn refers to an extinct. I wrote it down somewhere. Okay, well, there you go. Unless her mom gets killed by a shotgun shell. Then they move to town. Yeah.
Yes.
But-
Emptying bird feeders along
Yes.
the way.
But the unicorn here in verse 9 is called an aurochs. It's what's it mean when they don't extinct? Yeah, it's been extinct since 1627. But it was I know I wrote that down, but I can't find it. Yes. Oh, there it is. There it is. It was the most powerful of the hoofed beasts and exceeded only in size by the hippopotamus and the elephant. But again, they've been extinct since 1627. So that's what the unicorn
That
is.
seems kinda sad.
Yes.
I would have liked to have seen one.
Well,
Yes.
apparently. Not the way you're thinking, though.
Not the rainbow unicorn.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh?
Well, here's the
What?
thing. Just like when we went and visited the Ark, and you see all the animals, they ain't like the animals we have today, but they are what was there then, and same way with the unicorn.
Yeah. All right. So verse 9.
Will the unicorn be willing to serve thee, or abide by thy crib? Canst thou bind the unicorn with his band in the furrow? Or will he harrow the valleys after thee? Wilt thou trust him because his strength is great? Or wilt thou leave thy labor to him? Wilt thou believe him, that he will bring home thy seed and gather it into thy barn?
Now think about that. A farmer having, we'll use cattle as an example, or oxen. They trust them, or they, years prior, they would trust them to till their ground, scatter the seed, all these things an oxen would be trusted to do by their farmer or by their owner. Now again, we've got tractors today and all that, but back in the day, this is what they used. And they would trust in those animals to do what they needed them to do. So Job would think, yeah, I could trust them, but we really don't know. Have you ever seen a dog? Oh, well, he don't bite. Well, how come he bit my finger? We've always heard everybody say, oh, that dog don't bite. Well, I'm still not going to get close to it. But this is what God is asking. You can trust these things, but can you really? And I would say Don with his horses. Perhaps in some ways you can trust Don's horses to be gentle and loving, but there's still that little bitty chance that he could kick you with his back foot or whatever else a horse does. Throw you on the ground? Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, verse 13.
Gavest thou the goodly wings unto the peacocks?
Getting ahead of myself here, but God asked Job, did you give these wings to the peacocks? No. I stopped it too soon. I'm sorry.
Or wings and feathers unto the ostrich?
Did you give wings and feathers to the ostrich? Now, I don't know about a peacock, but I don't think an ostrich can fly. But he's got wings. Why would God bother to put wings on an ostrich if the ostrich can't fly?
So they could ride him on that Gilligan's Island?
Well, there you go. Well, yeah. But God had a reason why he gave an ostrich wings. Continuing with the ostrich here, verse 14.
Which leaveth her eggs in the earth, and warmeth them in dust, and forgetteth that the foot may crush them, or that the wild beast may break them.
An ostrich will put their eggs in the sand where something could come and crush them. Why did God allow that to happen? Because he wanted to.
She is hardened against her young ones, as though they were not hers. Her labor is in vain without fear. Because God hath deprived her of wisdom, neither hath he imparted to her understanding.
Why does the ostrich do those things in verses 14 through 16? Because God hath deprived her of wisdom. Now, we've all heard the term bury your head in the sand. That's from an ostrich. But God has decided, for whatever his reasoning is, that the ostrich would be this way because he has deprived her of wisdom and has not imparted to her understanding. Again, Job, why is an ostrich like that? And Job can say, well, I don't know. But again, we're lowering the severity of the questions here. We were talking about, what was it there? The foundations of the earth and the measurements of the sea and the rivers and all that. Now we've gotten down to where we're talking about a stupid ostrich. Verse 18.
What time she lifteth up herself on high, she scorneth the horse and his rider. Hast thou given the horse strength? Hast thou clothed his neck with thunder? Canst thou make him afraid as a grasshopper? The glory of his nostrils is terrible. He paweth in the valley, and rejoiceth in his strength. He goeth on to meet the armed men.
This is talking about being a horse in battle, or a war horse, and how majestic they are and how strong and fearless they are.
He mocketh at fear, and is not affrighted, neither turneth he back from the sword. The quiver rattleth against him, the glittering spear and the shield. He swalloweth the ground with fierceness and rage. Neither believeth he that it is the sound of the trumpet. He saith among the trumpets, Ha, ha! And he smelleth the battle afar off, the thunder of the captains, and the shouting.
A war horse just continues on, regardless of the situation. Unlike an ostrich that has no wisdom, has no understanding, and here's a horse that's doing what it's told, is going forth into battle, and is giving these descriptions of how a horse looks or acts when he's going into battle. All right, notice verse 26.
Doth the hawk fly by thy wisdom, and stretch her wings toward the south? Doth the eagle mount up at thy command, and make her nest on high?
God's asking, does the hawk fly because of your wisdom, Job? Does the eagle mount up at your command? Do you have any power in any of this? And obviously, Job, the answer is no. Again, God is showing his power to Job. And if God can take care of all of these matters of the animal kingdom and of nature and of the earth's creation and all these things, I think God can handle whatever it is he gives to us. And us, in turn, relies on the Lord to take care of us in whatever situation it is. Now, it might be easier to say here in Sunday school than it is when you're in the middle of it on a Thursday evening. But we need to remember that we need to trust the Lord because we are in his hand. Verse 28.
She dwelleth and abideth on the rock, upon the crag of the rock, and the strong place. From thence she seeketh the prey. In her eyes behold afar off. Her young ones also suck up blood, and where the slain are, there is she.
And I want to get into verse 5 of chapter 40, so we'll keep going here.
Job 40. Moreover, the Lord answered Job, and said, Shall he that contendeth with the Almighty instruct him? He that reproveth God, let him answer it.
So, God is now going to allow Job to speak. Here's what Job says in verse 3, 4, and 5.
Then Job answered the Lord, and said, Behold, I am vile. What shall I answer thee? I will lay mine hand upon my mouth. Once have I spoken, but I will not answer, yea, twice, but I will proceed no further.
Job's like, I really don't have anything to say, God. Now, Job had a lot to say to God and to his friends in the preceding, 30-some-odd chapters. But now, when he's standing before God and God gives him the opportunity to speak, he's, well, I really don't have anything to say. And I would assume that that's how we would be face-to-face with God in a way. What do you have to say? Well, I don't have anything to say. I'm vile. Now, I do want to turn, before we quit, we're about done here, go to Isaiah chapter 6. Isaiah chapter 6. You know, with God speaking to Job, Job understands how low he is, how vile he is, how reprobate he is, comparison to the almighty strength and nature of God. And we're going to see this same thing being played out here with Isaiah when he sees the Lord sitting on his throne here, which we'll read here in Isaiah 6, verse 1. This is Isaiah. He says, In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Above it stood the seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. With 20 he covered his face, with 20 he covered his feet, and with 20 he did fly. And one cried unto the other, said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. So Isaiah is seeing this scene of God sitting on his throne with these seraphim singing, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Verse 4, And the post of the door moved at the voice of him that cried, and the house was filled with smoke. Then said I, Woe is me. Once he saw God for who he is, Isaiah understood that woe is him, or like in Job's case, how vile he really was. Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips, for mine eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. So Job, when he was able to speak directly to God, face-to-face in a way, I'm vile. I have nothing to say. And Isaiah here, in much the same way, when he saw the Lord holy and lifted up, woe is me, I'm undone. I'm a man of unclean lips, and I dwell among a people with unclean lips. I do not have the capability of speaking anything in front of the Lord. And I think, again, going back to now Job, chapter 40, when Job has the opportunity, what do you say? I'm vile. What shall I answer thee? I will lay my hand upon my mouth. I'll just not say anything. Now, sometimes in a court of law, it's probably best that you not say anything. And perhaps in some way, when you're standing before the ultimate judge of the world, of the creation, maybe best just not say anything and let God do it. So anyway, comments or questions on what we've read so far?